Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Thursday, February 20th, day 503 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our editor, David Horowitz, on this very sad day for Israel. Hi, David. Thanks for joining me in our Jerusalem office.
Hey, Amanda.
This morning, in a staged ceremony in Gaza, Hamas handed over 4 black coffins to the International Red Cross, labeled with photos of those purportedly killed inside. The 4 were named by the terrorists as Shiri Bibas, Ariel Bibas, Kfir Bibas, and Oded Lifshitz, who were all kidnapped from their homes in Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th, 2023. The bodies of the 4 slain hostages have crossed the border from the Gaza Strip back into Israel 503 days since they were abducted alive. We'll hear about the 2 ceremonies conducted this morning, as well as the mood of the country on this terrible day. All this and much, much more when we're back. After the 4 coffins were secured into Israeli hands, a brief military ceremony was held in the Gaza Strip, led by IDF Chief Rabbi Brigadier General Eyal Karim. The coffins were draped in Israeli flags, and IDF troops saluted as Karim read Psalm 83, which calls on God to bring vengeance upon all of Israel's enemies. The coffins were then carried by officers into military vehicles to be brought to Israel for identification at the Abu Kabir Forensic Institute. David, before we talk about the Hamas ceremony, which was basically the antithesis of the brief IDF memorial, let's talk about the Bibas family and Oded Lifshitz and what they've come to mean for Israel, starting with the Bibas mother, Shiri, and her 2 children, Ariel and Kfir.
Look, there's been many Israelis who've been killed. On October the 7th, 1,200 people were killed, 1,200 people killed in southern Israel. Hundreds of soldiers have been killed in Gaza. The Bibas family, because of the particular awfulness of, one of so many terrible stories, but the particular awfulness of this story, and the fact that we've seen video of such crucial moments of it. There they were in Kibbutz Nir Oz, and Yarden, the father, husband, we've seen footage of him bleeding from his head, being driven into Gaza on a motorbike, surrounded by a mob of terrorists. And then we've seen the footage of Shiri clutching onto those 2 small children, with the distinctive red hair, of course, and just in this an impossible situation. What is she supposed to do? Surrounded by people who are abducting her. And then subsequently, we saw footage of Shiri with her 2 little boys in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. So we know that they made it to Gaza alive. And then you flash forward to just 2 weeks ago, basically, and Yarden is released. And does not know what has become of his family. And the family, even now as I speak, because the identification has not yet begun and it may take several hours, the family are saying they cling to the hope that somehow Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir are alive. I think most Israelis have long since feared the worst, including because they weren't released in November 2023, and they weren't released in the very first exchanges of this ceasefire, when children, of whom Kfir and Ariel were the only 2, and civilian women were supposed to be released first, and they were not, and Israel didn't even make a fuss about it at an official level, as though it was preparing the nation for the worst. So it's an incredibly harrowing story, and Israelis have been deeply affected by it.
Oded is a bit of a different case. His wife, who was also abducted on October 7th, and she was released very early on October 23rd, 2023, with another abductee. He represents to me the real archetype of the peacemaker who would take Gazans to hospitals. We've had several stories like that. Tell us a little bit more about Oded.
Well, as you say, somebody who believed in coexistence, a lifetime activist for coexistence, a lifelong journalist for whom that was a theme. And his wife, as you relate, came out very, very early, among the very first few people released, not in the framework of the November truce, but before that. And to put this delicately, we were in an era there where these processes, I mean, they still go wrong and things go. I mean, Israel, yes, they officially confirmed using language that's just plain wrong, that the four hostages coming out today, I mean, it indicated that it was accepting that they had been slain, but it has no way of knowing because the bodies. So there's still things that go wrong. But in the, when Oded Lifshitz was released, she held a press conference and said lovely things about Hamas, and that was a reflection of her worldview. It may also have been a desire to make sure that her husband was treated well by his captors. But yes, that's a family for whom, well, I suppose everything that's happened would be shattering in terms of their whole worldview. But that's me second guessing them. I don't know what they make of it.
Right. And in terms of PR, you mentioned Yocheved's press conference, and PR is so important to Hamas and presenting the image they want to get across. So let's talk about, to me, a very horrific ceremony this morning. It was staged like all the other hostage releases we've seen. And in the middle of the stage was a massive poster with our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, as a vampire. Above the beautiful family, Shiri Bibas and her two children, Kfir and Ariel, blood dripping onto them, and accusations in 3 languages, Arabic, bad Hebrew, and English, that it is indeed the prime minister who killed these children and their mother and the missiles and the warplanes. What else did you see at this ceremony?
Well, this was a propaganda ceremony, and I think it was intended to be even worse. It's not entirely clear to me, but it may be that the Red Cross flexing a muscle, perhaps, for the first time that we've been aware of that. Any of these ceremonies didn't allow some of the things that Hamas wanted to do, and including very close camera close-ups of the coffins and so on. And they set up screens, the Red Cross, to partly at least obscure the process of the transfer of the coffins, and they draped the Hamas coffins in white fabric and covered up all the messaging that Hamas had placed on them. Yeah, let's not be surprised by any of this. This is the terrorist organization that invaded Israel and killed all those people, and in the most terrible ways, and abducted 251, and is using every ounce of leverage which those hostages gave it to try and survive. So it was predictably and yet horrifyingly awful.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. After the IDF received the caskets from the Red Cross, the IDF proceeded to complete some security screenings. And the presumption is that there was a potential for booby traps on the caskets themselves. David, what do you know about this?
Yeah, I mean, we that's what we've heard, and there would necessarily be a presumption of at least the possibility of bad things being done by Hamas. So, potentially these coffins do not contain remains and do contain explosives. That appears not to have been the case, in part because we know they did a security check, and also because they held a military ceremony and led by the Army's Chief Rabbi. They know they're not saying prayers over something foul and not what they think it is. They don't know for sure that these are the bodies. This is going to take a long time. The health minister has also said the goal of the identification process, which is going to begin fairly soon at Abu Kabir, the Forensic Institute in central Israel, just outside Tel Aviv, is designed not only to establish whether these 4 coffins contain the 4 slain hostages, but also the circumstances of their death. And therefore, he said it might take a little longer than you might expect, but that's what they're going to try and do.
So as you mentioned earlier, the families of the named slain hostages are not exactly at the point where they're ready to accept 100% the identification. And the Bibas family said last night, should we receive the devastating news, it must come through the proper official channels. After all identification procedures are completed, we ask to refrain from eulogizing our loved ones until there is a confirmation following final identification. This statement came out after the Prime Minister's office had basically confirmed the names, at least that these are the names that the Hamas terrorists listed. But this lack of coordination with the families is very troubling to me, and I'm actually stunned by it. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, my understanding is that, I don't know exactly, but the IDF has said that it was their error and that they had given the Prime Minister's office to understand that they had coordinated that announcement with the families. Apparently, the IDF had not been in touch. I don't know, with anyone from the Bibas family, or perhaps past the Bibas family. I don't know, but it was also an issue of the wording. The remain. They're supposed to return the remains, not that Israel is confirming that the slain human remains are being returned. Do you understand the difference? And in terms of where the families are now, they're waiting for the proper experts to deliver their analysis. And as Kfir Bibas, that's Yarden's sister, said in a Facebook message that you quoted from, that the family put out, people have been eulogizing this family for, well over a year. And could we please wait for things to be certain? It's not that we're not going to believe it when they tell us, but we haven't been told. The experts have not told us yet.
Out of the mouth of babes, right? But one of my children asked me this morning, why are they releasing the bodies of hostages before all the living hostages are being set free? This is, of course, part of the phased deal that was negotiated. But David, do you have any insight into that?
Well, part of the explanation for that is that on the list of 33 names which are being released in the course of the phase one of the deal, this is a 42-day phase. We're nearing the end of it. In 2 days' time, the final known living hostages from that phase are being released. But Israel did not only put people that it knew were alive on that list and prioritized humanitarian cases, in other words, women, elderly men over 50. It added names there, as far as I know, of people whose fate it did not know. And, for example, the 8 bodies we are told to anticipate receiving, the 4 the week that came today, and another 4 that are supposed to be returned next week. I imagine, in fact, I have no doubt that Israel would have wanted to maximize. Prime Minister Netanyahu said this time after time, trying to maximize the number of living hostages we get out, and as quickly as possible in phase one, if possible, and so on. Even in the last few days, there's been an effort to extend phase one to add more living hostages to the list. This is a negotiation between two sides. It is not surprising that hostages, shall we say, who Hamas believes have more value for it to hold. I'm thinking of younger men, military-age men, and soldiers, male soldiers. They have not wanted to release those hostages in the course of a process where they had originally been demanding that Israel end the war as a condition for any hostage releases, and then gradually agreed to release hostages with a vaguer pledge and negotiations on phase two, in the course of which Israel is supposed to withdraw all IDF forces and end the war. So there's a lot of back and forth here, but I think those are some of the explanations.
So in the same vein of that question, on Saturday, as you mentioned, 6 living male hostages are set to be released. And these include Avera Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed, who have been held by Hamas since entering the Strip on their own in 2014 and 2015. And this is, again, something that one of my children asked me, why are these 2 being included in this deal right now in the first phase?
Yeah, so I think it's a function of the back and forth and what Israel was able to do and what Hamas was prepared to agree to in the context of its demands, which are centrally that they get to survive. The war ends, the army pulls out, and so on. And I don't know how Israel ranked and rated 2 people who chose to go into Gaza apparently because they are have mental issues, mentally unwell. I mean, nobody crosses sensibly into Gaza, not today and not 10 years ago. But it's a function of the back and forth and the negotiations with Hamas.
Okay, David. So we are at this juncture right now where the second phase talks have or have not begun, very unclear to me. And the question is on the table whether Israel will take this deal that Hamas, at least allegedly, is proposing to release all the hostages in one go in order to survive. And nobody can predict the future, obviously, and it's all speculation now. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it is all speculation. It's not clear that this is a genuine Hamas stance as opposed to something said by a Hamas official. It's not entirely clear who speaks for Hamas. We can only be confident about things that have actually happened. So we know that whatever doubts there may have been about the process to date, well, with lots of issues and lots of spectacular unpleasantness, the process has played out in terms of the core essential. People being released, Israel doing what it has said it was going to do to this stage. But yeah, we don't even know for sure. There's a lot of, there are delegations, there are contacts. It would seem that there is not substantive negotiations on the second phase, but that may turn out not to be the case as well. What would be the relative advantage for Israel and for Hamas if all the hostages? First of all, do they mean that all the living and the dead in phase two? What would be the relative advantages for the two sides if this is to happen? I'm certain that Israel would want to expedite and maximize the number of living hostages coming out. The question is, at what cost? Is it ready to do whatever is the other side of that bargain, which includes the things I've mentioned, but also includes the release of many Palestinian terrorists? In the course of phase one, something like 2,000 Palestinians are being released, including some really terrible mass murdering terrorists, one of whom was seen at the ceremony today, somebody who's serving, I think, 48 life terms, which is one of the longest sentences Israel has ever imposed. And there he is. He was supposed to have been deported to Egypt. He got, quote unquote, stuck in Gaza. How does that even come to pass? At what point did Israel relinquish control over him? So as you say, there's a lot of things going on that aren't always clear, that aren't always even clear after they've happened. So what may happen, we'll see.
David, thank you so much for your insights and updates today.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.